Hello, this is Autodesk 3D Studio Max 2015. This is the first screen you will see when you open up the program, and what it presents you with is a choice to either browse for an existing file, or if it's one that you've worked on more recently, you'll see it in this box right here and you can just open it up. The other thing you can do is create a new scene, and you have your choice of workspaces that you can start out with here. Of course, once you're in the program, you can change your workspace setup as well. Over here, we have, under Learn, we have videos that ship with the program for training purposes, and we'll be going through those in class today. I think they'll be very helpful and inspiring. And under Extend, these are features that are extensions of 3D Studio Max that work with 3D Studio Max. And the one I think you should look at initially would be this Autodesk. Look at all of them, obviously, but Autodesk 360 I think is something to take seriously, because instead of tying up your computer when you can be using it for other things, rendering scenes, you can do that within the Autodesk 360 cloud. So that is a really good feature that I strongly suggest you look into, because you used to pay sites to render them for you, so that you didn't do that. You could do that anyway. You could pay a site to render it for you, and those were called render farms, where they had a number of different servers that you could send it to, and they would sit there and crunch for days until they had the scene. Of course, everything's much faster now, and space is not as difficult as it used to be, so there are a lot of clouds popping up, and if you don't have a lot of hard drive space, here's another advantage. With the new solid state drives, they don't generally give you a lot of terabytes of space. They're typically 250 gigs or 500 gigs, and while you can do it on that, it's much better, I think, to do it in this Autodesk 360 cloud. That way you're not tying up your resources. All right, let's get started. I created an exercise file for this class, which I've lightened the background to sort of make it easier to project. However, it comes with the black background like AutoCAD. If you're used to that background, then keep it the way it is. If you want to change it, you can obviously change it, just like you can AutoCAD. You go up here in the Customize User Interface area. Got it. And then Colors. And here you have Viewport Background. You've got choices here on different things that you can change. Colors. And you've got background here too. So play around with these settings in class and try to get accustomed to the ones that really affect your interface and how you want to set it up, because ultimately I've got mine set up the way I did. I didn't have to go through every single one of these to get it that way. I just had, I think those two right there I changed and got it pretty close to the way you're seeing it here. And there's so many here, there's so many different variations that you can set things up. I don't know that it's worth your time trying to learn every single one of them. Just the ones that affect the way you want to do work on your computer. And I'll help you if you come upon a problem that you can't get your display to show exactly the way you want it to, or can't get a menu item or any of these toolbars or all of the variations of things that you can change, customize, then I'll help you. And if I can't, then I'll help you at the moment. I will do some research on it and get back with you instead of wasting your time, and I'll email it to you. Once you get it the way you want it, you can save it out however you want to, and you can save it out with whatever name, and I would go ahead and save it into the workspaces folder. And I'm not going to do that since I've already got mine set up. Or you can actually load it. You can load it, and I think all I've got is this particular color setting. Yeah, you can load it from here. So I could go back to the very original black screen that I had if I wanted to, because I saved that out here, and open that, and it'll set it back to the way it was. But that's good to know that you can customize all aspects of this program to suit your needs. And of course, I'm here to help you do that. The other thing I would suggest is go through your menu here and look at all of the different things underneath each item in the menu and try to determine what it is that you really don't know what it is. Now, early on you can just play around with them, but if it's something that's just not obvious, then I will be covering all of these items. Or if it's something that you have a question on, bring it to me and I'll help you any way I can. We will be covering most of these in class, so try not to jump too far ahead unless of course you need it for your project. You need that sort of. Now here's a quick select bar here. You've got your, and sometimes you'll get to a point where you'll maximize your screen to the point where this is the only thing available. So you can either redo, undo, save. It's got the basic commands here. There, that shows you where your where I've set my folder up on was the desktop. And, these are some other options. So you can actually show it below the ribbon, which this is the actual ribbon. And you can toggle that ribbon on and off as you need it. And we'll get more detail on that ribbon as we move into the class. One thing I would suggest that you do as far as your settings go is go to Customize and go to Preferences. And then go to Files. I would strongly suggest that you put that on Convert Local Paths to Relative, because that way, if you move all of your work from a C drive to an S drive, it'll still, realize where the root folder is and what all the subfolders are in respect to that root folder. If you don't change that, you move it from a C drive to an S drive, you're going to have some issues. So that's one thing that I strongly recommend that you change. I want to go ahead and do that now. And learn the shortcuts, because the shortcuts will enable you to switch in and out of modes where you can either pop in on the one perspective view that you're working on and hide the other so that you're focused in on what you're actually doing. And sometimes you're going to do that, want to do that. Now, Alt W will do that, whichever is selected, whichever viewport is selected. Zoom extents selected. And that did that to that, so that was the selected one. But keep in mind, you've got Zoom extents selected and Zoom extents all selected. See? That zooms them all in. or zoom all. Now you can zoom just by panning, holding your left mouse key and moving up or down, and that'll zoom in and zoom out for you. Of course, you can hold your middle button, and that gives you the ability to pan, or what they call actual pan in this. That's actually, I think, called trucking in real life, but their language is panning. And you can see there's a panning tool down here too if you don't want to use your third mouse. Orbit sub-object. It's orbiting it. You may use that from time to time to move around on a model without wanting to move in any sort of drastic manner. Now this is a focal point control, and this gives you the actual field of view. It's almost like zooming in and zooming out, as you can see as well. But it can create results that are undesirable. And if it ever does, then just zoom all the way in and then zoom out again, and it should fix whatever problems that it creates. Time configuration. You have all of your animation tools down here. You can set your keyframes here for animation. Then you have your control panel over here, which has all of your primitives that you can create. Here's your selection. Of course, you have your, if you've got it turned on, you can just roll over any tool and it'll pretty much tell you what it is. It's just a matter of getting used to it, and I'm sure you're used to most of this terminology if you've ever worked in AutoCAD. It's not going to be hard to pick up. Like I said, they tried to emulate AutoCAD as much as they possibly could in order to make that learning curve much easier. You've got your line tools, layer manager. All of these should be familiar terms to you from previous classes. Now it's going to work slightly different in this because you're dealing in 3 dimensions. If you haven't before, this will be maybe maybe the only thing you're going to be doing differently is working in a Z axis, which you're going to be able to do an awful lot in the way of giving your customer or client a better visualization of what you're trying to present. Well, let's look at this box real quick. I'm going to go ahead and Alt W so that I can show you how you can create segments. You can go here to your modify panel, scroll down, and you can either increase or decrease the segments. Now these are called slider controls, and you can see how I'm just moving my mouse up or down and it's changing the value there. You can hard code it in just by typing it in if you would prefer. But it gives you another option of sort of quickly doing that. Now you can also, I think, use your up or down button on those. No, you can't. I thought you could. There's some other programs out there that you can do that with, where you can use your up or down button to change that. But you're going to have to use that slider ability. Now you can either do it that way as well. Just hold on the up or down button, or just, like I said, move it up or down. Now, what you need to get accustomed to is, I guess, some of the terminology, and I'm sure you're used to a lot of this from your previous classes. And these are called viewports. Now, these viewports are generally you can customize them, but generally this is how they come. They come as, in the top, left, front, or user, which is oftentimes perspective or isometric view, because generally these don't converge. Now they might be now because I messed around with that field of view, this field of view control. If they look like they're converging, that's probably because, and that's where it can sometimes, like I said, give you some undesirable results. But if that ever happens, just zoom in and zoom out. The different choices that you have, you can look at it as a wireframe, and sometimes it's better to do that. You can just look at it, simplify it so that you can move it around and not have to look at all the lines as a bounding box. So, get used to what you can do with changing it here. But when you get into more complex modeling, the shaded is going to take longer for your computer to process. And of course, the bounding box wouldn't take much time at all. Play gives you sort of a, say it's a play. But you have all these choices, and that's good. But let's go back to shaded. I like shaded because you can select it. You can still see all of the faces on there. And speaking of which, let's cover that. Keep in mind, all these intersections here are going to be points, and you can manipulate those when you flatten this into a polygon. And as you flatten that into a polygon, you'll be able to grab and change this cube into anything that you want to, actually, by grabbing the vertexes and moving them. The faces you'll be able to move as well. You'll be able to scale them, move them in and out, and that'll enable you to change those. The elements, which would be, say that whole cube, because really that cube, even though you can't see it, is divided by a diagonal line. And you can see that on page, I think it's 4. Yeah, page 4 in your book. The vertex is a point, and that represents the intersection. The face is the diagonal that cuts through most all of these. And the element would be the actual square. And the object would be, of course, this whole cube. Now, a lot of the ways you're going to be working is you're going to, in many cases, start out with just, say if you have an image map here of a cube, of a square, say. You bring in an image that's a square. You will then choose the box and trace the square basically and extrude it to the level that you need. And you can of course adjust that here, the level at it, height. You can type it in, you can hard code it if it's easier to do it that way. And that's typically extruding. The other thing you can do is rotate this particular cube, say on an axis. If I drew an axis here and I told this thing to go ahead and rotate around that axis, that's something that you can do. And you will have to concern yourself with the number of segments here, because the fewer segments you have, the more faceted it's going to look. The more segments that you have, the smoother it's going to be. So keep that in mind. If you start doing it with just, say, 5 segments and you try to create a donut, well, it's going to have 5 pretty harsh angles to it. And that would be called a lathe, is when you start to spin it around an axis. And of course, let's see here. Under modify list, you have any of these tools here, that should enable you to get the effect that you want. It's huge, and we will be covering a lot of them, so buckle in. And you can mesh select, patch select. But of course, we'll start getting into these into detail. I do want you to look through this, though, to start to familiarize yourself with what we have here. Now you're going to bend. You can start to see what I'm talking about, and then you can always go back and add more segments. Oh. Again, that's the wrong one. And you can see how smooth that starts to get. And of course we can move that up if we want to. And you know, when you zoom in, you can even see that's when you'll need to determine how many segments you'll need. Because obviously when you're zoomed in like this, you can see them. So that may require at this moment that you go in here and add additional segments to smooth that out a little bit more. See, now you're starting to get to the point where that's pretty smooth. Okay, let's go back to our full 4-window view. And again, I might toggle this ribbon off because we're not really using it. So anyway, these are the modeling viewports. And most in the top, front, and left view, you'll only be dealing with two axes, whether it's the X and the Y, or just the, let's see what we have here. It's these, here obviously we'll have a Z. Anytime you go in the direction that's straight up, that's going to be your Z axis, as you can see here. I'll give you a little hint on your orientation in that particular view here down in the left-hand corner. As to what axes you're looking at in that particular view. As you get into rendering, there are things that you will be concerned with, and that is color, material, light, rendering, and material shading types. Under color, you're going to have some choices, and one will be red, green, blue, RGB. 255, you've got white. If all of them are equal to 0, you have black. Black is the absence of color. White is the presence of all color. The HLS is another form of color: hue, luminance, and saturation. And of course, hue is the color, and luminance would be how reflective it is, and saturation would be how rich the color is. Whether it's fully saturated, which would mean that it's almost as brilliant as it can be, or less saturated, where if you studied the Menzel color chart at all, adding in a painting environment, if you were to add blue, green to red, it starts to reduce its saturation and turn it more towards a gray. So that's how that works. A form of mixing color for use in AutoCAD 3D Studio Max design is HBW, and that is hue, blackness, and whiteness. And that basically means taking a color and either adding black or white to it to take it either closer to its more brilliant hue or saturated hue or away from it, and making it either lighter or darker. Gamma is more of a screen terminology, dealing with intensity of the low and middle tones of your display. So we'll get into more of that as we get into it, but it's more applicable towards NTSC video, television, and videotape. It deals with your monitor and how your monitor perceives color, because of course every monitor is set, the gamut is set slightly different, which is why no two monitors are going to visualize color exactly the same way. So material would be surface color. Color changes according to how light hits it, gradient, which is basically gradient colors. You know, I'm sure you've seen in most Photoshop or any other thing how you can create gradients, and they go from a very dark to a very brilliant saturated color. That's gradient. And surface colors do that, you know, as light hits them. Surface behavior, you know, you've got shiny, dull, transparent, opaque. You have image mapping, mapping an image to an object, which, you know, say this particular object that I've got here. You know, we can literally map marble to that and make it look like some kind of marble column. Obviously, we'd have to spin that around, but maybe some kind of marble column. And we've got image mapping, which you're going to have to scale that in order to get more realistic. You're going to have to scale whatever photograph. In fact, you can go out and photograph a piece of wood and map that to this object right here and make it look like that piece of wood that you photographed. I've done that before. Or marble, that if you can't find a sample on the internet or within the library that you have, then, you know, that's how you could do that with a photograph. Okay, lights. You're going to set up lights at some point. So it's good to know, you know, how lights are rendered. Ambient lights are the lights that are present and can be intense or soft. And that's just if you enter a room and a room has a nice wash to it. That's ambient light, and it can either be soft or it can be harsh. Omni lights radiate in all directions from the source. That's like having a room with a light bulb in the middle of it. That light will cast shadows depending on the height of it. And say if it's low, then obviously the shadows are going to elongate lower on the floor, and if it's up high, like, you know, as high as the sun, and at 12 o'clock, then you're not going to have much of a shadow. It's going to be right underneath it almost. So that's how an omni light would look. And a spotlight is directional, and it will illuminate some things, and things that are out of its peripheral won't get illuminated. So it's a very directional type of light. Rendering and material shading types. You've got faceted, which you can see on page. Incidentally, if you want to look at the lighting examples that I just spoke of. You can see some of those examples on page 7. And on the following page, page 8, you can look at the different types of rendering. The faceted, the Phong, and the metal rendering. The faceted, of course, gives you, shows you faceted edges where there are faceted edges, and the Phong smooths those out so it blends edges, and the metal actually just does what it says it does. It gives it more of a metallic look. You can see again examples of that on page 8. And finally, I'm going to get into some animation types. Cartoon animation. And if you're familiar with the flip book at all, which I'm sure from childhood, you could draw images on each page, piece of paper, stacked, and each page has a static image of something slightly different, and then you flip through it and it gives the appearance of motion. Well, that is the cartoon animation type. Now, typically cartoon animation and film and video animation are only different in the frames per second. The cartoon animation operates at 12 to 24 frames per second. Motion pictures are at 24 frames per second typically. Now, obviously, those in motion picture, if they wanted to do slow motion, or they wanted to do fast motion, they would either increase or decrease those frames per second. Typically during the filming process. So, if you're filming, say, a whole day, then passing, where you see the sun moving quickly across the sky, they're running that at a pretty slow speed. And then when they run it normally, then it appears that all that stuff is going pretty quick. So it's sort of opposite of what you might expect, and vice versa. Now, Autodesk Design will allow you to save these out as the native file, and or something that can actually be played as a Windows media file. And there are other programs that play those variations. I've converted them into AVIs. There are different codecs and ways to convert them into different movie types, so that your end result can either play in QuickTime, say, or Windows Media. And that pretty much concludes Chapter 1. And please let me know if you have any questions.